The branch above us exploded with a sharp crack. Then something answered from the darkness. The sound wasn't a roar. It wasn't a howl. It was something far worse. A deep guttural call that echoed through the jungle and made every instinct in my body scream one command. Run. My legs nearly gave out beneath me. My name is Veshk, Junior Survey Officer of the Tethan Expeditionary Corps, and that was the night I discovered that not every intelligent species experiences fear the same way. Humans certainly didn't. We had crashed only 19 hours earlier. Our shuttle rested at the bottom of a rocky ravine, twisted into a heap of scorched metal. Emergency lights blinked through the wreckage like the fading heartbeat of a dying machine. 6 of us had escaped the impact alive. Surviving the crash, however, was only the beginning. The planet seemed determined to finish what gravity had started. I remember the heat before anything else. It wrapped around us like a living thing, hot, damp, and suffocating. Every breath felt thick enough to drink. Every movement demanded effort as the crushing gravity pulled relentlessly at my muscles and joints. My people evolved beneath endless grasslands and wide, peaceful skies. We are a herd species. Our instincts were shaped to flee danger, not confront it. That world had no interest in respecting those instincts, soft and careful, and our whole history is the history of staying together and running from danger. That world had no gentleness in it. The trees grew in 3 great layers, one above the other, so that even at midday, the ground stayed in shadow. Things moved in those shadows. We could hear them, but we could not see them, and for a Tethan, there is no worse feeling in the universe. Our captain, a steady older Tethan named Laroon, kept telling us to stay calm. His voice shook while he said it. Our engineer, Pell, sat against a rock and stared at nothing. I was no better. I counted my own heartbeats and tried not to think about the academy lesson that says a stranded crew survives 9 days on average before a Deathworld finishes the job. I had reached 19 hours. I did not believe I would reach the 2nd day. And then there were the 2 humans. I had heard of humans before that voyage, but only as a kind of story. Among my people, they were spoken of in low voices, the way you speak of a storm that destroyed a city before you were born. The Deathworld species. The old officers called them the ones who came from a planet that tried to end them every single day and somehow raised children there. Anyway, I had thought it was an exaggeration. Most Academy stories are. Then I watched 2 of them work, and I stopped thinking it was a story. Their names were Ren and Talia. Talia was the one you noticed first. She was warm and loud and quick to laugh, and she had a way of looking at frightened crew members that made them feel less alone. In the first hour after the crash, while the rest of us shook, Talia went from Tethan to Tethan, touching shoulders, saying small, steady things, pulling us back from the edge of panic by sheer force of kindness. I had never met a creature like her. I have not met one since. Ren was different. Ren was the one you did not notice, and that was the first mistake I made about her, though it would not be the last. She was small, even for a human, plain in the face, with dark hair tied back and eyes that did not seem to blink as often as they should, while Talia comforted us. Ren walked the edge of our little clearing in slow circles, looking up into the trees, looking down at the ground, picking up handfuls of soil and letting them fall. She did not speak much. When she did, it was short and exact. I thought she was cold. I thought she did not feel things the way Talia did. That was the second mistake. It was Ren who built the fire. None of us would have known how. Fire frightens my people almost as much as the dark does. We are taught to fear it from the time we can walk. But Ren gathered dry wood from the underside of fallen trunks where the rain had not reached. And she struck a spark with 2 small tools from her kit, and within minutes we had light and warmth, where before there had been only cold and shadow. The flames pushed the dark back a few steps. For the first time since the crash, I could breathe. "Stay close to it," Ren said. That was all. She did not explain. She did not need to. The first night, nothing came close enough to see. We heard them, though. There were calls in the dark, long and low, answered from far away by calls just like them. The sounds moved. They circled. I understood in the cold center of my chest that something out there was paying attention to us, and that it was patient. By morning I had not slept. Neither had any of the Tethan. The two humans had taken turns resting, calm as anything, as if the night had been ordinary. What were those sounds? I asked Talia, when the gray light finally came. She gave me a small, honest smile. Something big, she said. Something smart. Ren's been listening to it. She thinks there's more than one. She glanced toward Ren, who sat by the dying fire, staring into the trees. When Ren goes quiet like that, she's working something out. Best to let her. I did not understand what that meant yet. I would. The second day, we tried to fix the shuttle. Pell and Lauren crawled through the wreck, while the rest of us watched the Triine. The work was slow, and the news was bad. The engine core was cracked. We had no way to repair it with what we carried. We would have to wait for a relief ship. And a relief ship would not even begin looking for us until we missed our next report, which was 4 days away. 4 days on a world that 8 visitors in 9. I did the arithmetic and wished I had not. Talia kept us moving through the fear. She organized the water collection. She showed the Tethan how to ration the few supplies we had pulled from the wreck. She made a joke about my counting, a gentle one, and for a moment I almost laughed. And the almost laughing was the kindest thing anyone had given me in 2 days. I want you to understand who she was because of what came next. I want you to understand that the galaxy lost something the night the dark came for her. It came on the second night, and it came fast. I had been watching the eastern edge of the clearing, where the shadows were deepest, and I saw nothing, and that was the trick of it. They did not come from the place I was watching. They came from above, from the second layer of the canopy, where the branches were thick enough to carry a heavy body in silence. They had moved into position while we slept, and woke, and worried, and they dropped into our clearing all at once between one breath and the next. I will not describe them fully. Even now the memory makes my hands shake. They were large, larger than any of us, built low and long for moving fast in the dark, with eyes that caught the firelight and threw it back like cold coins. There were many of them. They did not roar or charge wildly. That was the worst part. They were organized. Some of them held the edges of the clearing, cutting off the ways we might run, while others moved toward us with a terrible patient purpose. They had done this before. They had done it to others. We were not their first stranded crew, and they were not afraid of our fire. The Tethans scattered. That is what my people do. It is bred into us across 1,000 generations. We break apart and run, each one hoping to be the one the danger does not choose. I am ashamed to say I ran too. I ran with my heart in my throat and the breath sawing in and out of me, and I did not look back until I had reached the slope above the clearing. And when I looked back, I saw the thing that has lived behind my eyes every night since. They had Talia. She was fighting. She was strong, stronger than I would have guessed, and she was striking at them and shouting in a voice that carried over the chaos. But there were too many, and they were too large. And they were not trying to end her there in the clearing. They were dragging her, pulling her toward the Triine, toward the dark second layer of the canopy they had come from, with the awful coordinated calm of creatures carrying away something they meant to keep. I understood it then with a clarity that made me sick. They were not hunting to feed. They were taking. They had a place they took things, and they were taking her to it. Ren, Talia's voice tore across the clearing, and it was not a cry of fear. It was a cry of warning. Even then, even with the dark closing over her, she was thinking of the other human. Don't, Ren. Don't follow them now. You can't. You have to think first. You have to. And then the canopy closed, and her voice was gone, swallowed by leaves and distance, and the clearing was empty except for the dying fire and the scattered shaking shapes of my crew. I expected Ren to break. I had read about it, you understand? In the Academy files, there were notes on humans, warnings really, about how they could come apart under great stress. They called it grief, and they called it rage, and they said it could make a human do reckless, destructive things. And they advised Tethan officers to keep their distance from a human in that state. So I expected her to scream. I expected her to charge into the trees after the pack and be lost the way Talia had been lost. I braced myself for it. Part of me, the cowardly part, was already grieving them both. That is not what happened. Ren stood at the edge of the clearing where Talia's voice had vanished. She did not move toward the trees. She did not make a sound. The firelight shook on her still face, and her eyes followed the place where her friend had disappeared. And I watched her, and I waited for the breaking, and the breaking did not come. Instead, something changed in her face. It is hard to describe to someone who has not seen it. It was not coldness, though I called it coldness then because I did not have a better word. It was more like a light going on behind glass. Every soft thing in her expression smoothed away, and what was left was something focused and quiet and absolutely awake. She looked at the trees the way Ren looked at everything, the way I had mistaken for not caring on the first day. She looked at them the way a person looks at a lock they have decided to open. Then she sat down by the fire. She did not weep. She did not speak. She picked up a piece of charred wood from the edge of the flames, and she found a flat stone, and she began to make small marks on it, lines and angles I did not understand. Luan crept back into the clearing and tried to speak to her, tried to offer the soft mourning sounds my people make when we have lost one of our own, and Ren did not even seem to hear him. Pell asked her in a trembling voice what we should do, whether we should run further, whether the things would come back. Ren did not answer. She made another mark on the stone. Her eyes moved from the marks to the tree scene and back again and again, measuring something, weighing something, while the rest of us stood frozen in our fear. I came closer than the others. I do not know why. Perhaps because I had watched her build the fire, and I had begun against all my training to feel that where Ren was the safest place to be. I crouched near her, close enough to see the marks she was making, and I still could not read them, but I could feel the thing pouring out of her into that stone. And it was not despair. It was the opposite of despair. It was the most concentrated thing I have ever felt come off a living creature. She is gone, I whispered to her because I thought she did not understand. I am sorry, she is gone. For a long moment, Ren did not respond. The fire cracked far off in the dark. One of the things called out, and another answered it, and Ren's head turned a fraction of a degree toward the sound, and her hand made one more mark on the stone, a careful line connecting two of the others. Then she spoke just once. Her voice was low and even, and it did not shake at all. "Not gone," she said, "taken. There's a difference." I did not understand the difference. Not yet. To my people, the two words meant the same thing because to my people, anything the dark took was never coming back. But Ren said it the way you state a fact you have already checked twice. And she went back to her stone and she did not say another word that night. I sat with her until the gray light came again. I watched her fill the flat stone with marks and then start on a second one. I watched her listen to every call from the dark and write something down each time. I did not sleep. I am not sure she did either, and somewhere in those long hours, crouched beside that strange small creature while the Deathworld breathed around us, I began to understand something that the Academy files had gotten wrong, something that would take 3 days to show its full and terrible shape. I had thought she had shattered. I thought the silence was the sound of a human coming apart. I did not yet know that humans do not shatter, they reconfigure, and I did not yet know that the thing I was watching, the quiet, and the marks, and the listening, was the most dangerous thing on that whole murderous world, beginning very slowly and very precisely to wake up. The fire burned down to embers. Ren made her marks, and out in the dark, the things that had taken Talia did not know yet that they had made the worst mistake of their long and patient lives. The morning after they took Talia, Ren did not eat. She did not rest. She did not say a single word to any of us. She simply began. I want to tell you exactly what she did over those 3 days, because at the time I did not understand it, and only later looking back did I see the shape of the thing she was building. It was not a search. A Tethan in our grief and our fear might have wandered the trees calling a lost friend's name until the dark took us too. It was not a charge either, the wild, reckless rush the Academy files had warned me about. It was something I had no word for, something my species has never once done in all our long and careful history. She was studying. She was turning a living nightmare into a problem, and she meant to solve it. The first day, she watched. She left the clearing at first light, and I followed her because I could not make myself stay behind, though my whole body screamed at me to hide. She did not go far. She moved to the tree, to the place where the pack had carried Talia away, and she crouched there and looked at the ground for what felt like an hour. I did not understand what she was seeing. To me it was only dirt and crushed leaves. To Ren it was a record. She pointed at marks in the soft earth, deep ones and shallow ones, and she traced them with her finger, and I realized she was reading the way the creatures had moved, how many there were, how heavy each one was, which direction they had gone. The ground was a page and she was reading it. She found the marks their claws had left on the bark of the trees, and she measured their height against her own body. Holding up her hand flat against the trunk, she found places where the things had passed often, where the bark was worn smooth, and she understood from this that the pack used the same paths again and again. They were creatures of habit. That was the first thing she wrote on her stone that I actually understood when she explained it to me later. Predators that hunt in an organized way move along routes they trust, and a route you trust is a route someone else can learn. All that first day she gathered, she found their leanings and studied them without any sign of disgust, working out what they had eaten and how recently she found tufts of coarse hair caught on low branches and rubbed them between her fingers. She found a place where the ground was packed flat and stained, a place the pack used often, and she went very still when she found it, and her jaw tightened, and she made a long row of marks on her stone. I did not ask her what that place was. I think I did not want to know. But the thing she spent the most time on, the thing that surprised me most, was the sound. The creatures called to each other in the dark. We had all heard it on the first 2 nights. Those long, low cries answered from far away. To me, the sounds were only terror given a voice. To Ren, they were language. She sat at the edge of the clearing through the whole of that first day, and every time a call came from the trees, near or far, she marked the time and the direction, and something about the sound itself, a rising note or a falling one, a single cry or a doubled one. By the end of the day, her second stone was covered in marks, and when I looked at them, I saw that she had grouped them, sorted them, found patterns in them. She had begun to understand what the calls meant. A call that meant come here, a call that meant danger, a call that meant found something. She was learning to speak a language no creature of mine would ever have dared to listen to long enough to learn. That night, by the embers, I finally found the courage to ask her. "Why?" I said. "Why do you do this?" "She is taken. The others, they wish to run further from this place, to find somewhere safer to wait for the relief ship." "Why do you sit here and count the cries of the things that took her?" For a long time she did not answer. I had grown used to her silences, and I no longer expected her to break them. But then she set down her stone, and she looked at me, and in the light of the embers her face was very tired and very calm at the same time. "On my world," she said, "we were not the strongest thing, we were not the fastest, we had no claws, no thick hide, nothing the big animals had. For a very long time, we were food." She said the word plainly without flinching, and I admit it made me flinch for her. Do you know how a small, soft animal survives in a place full of things that want to take it? It does not survive by being stronger. It survives by being the thing that watches, the thing that remembers, the thing that learns the pattern of the danger and uses the pattern against it. She picked the stone back up. "I am not stronger than them. I will never be stronger than them, but I do not need to be stronger. I need to be right, and to be right, I need to know everything. But Talia," I said softly, "surely she is. Surely by now she is alive," Ren said, and the certainty in her voice stopped me cold. "How can you know that?" "Because they did not take her to be food. If they wanted food, they would not have carried her so far. Creatures that hunt the way these do, that take living things and carry them to a single place, they return to again and again. They keep what they take. They keep it for a time. I do not know how long." Her eyes went to her stones, to all the marks she had made. "That is the thing I am solving. How long? Because however long it is a clock, and the clock is still running, and as long as it is running, she is a problem I can still fix." She looked at me, and for one moment the calm cracked, just slightly, and underneath it, I saw something so fierce and so deep that it frightened me more than the dark had. Grief is for after, she said quietly. Right now, she is a variable I can still solve for. I will grieve when there is nothing left to do. There is still something left to do. I had no answer for that. My people do not think the way she thinks. When the dark takes one of us, we mourn and we move on, because we have never once believed there was anything else we could do. I had spent my whole life believing that the dark always wins. Sitting beside that small, fierce creature, I began for the first time to wonder if I had been wrong. The second day, she tested. She had watched and now she pushed. I followed her again, more willing this time, and I watched her do things that made my blood run cold, even as they filled me with a kind of awe. She took the tuft of coarse hair she had found, and the leaves she had gathered, and she made trails with them, dragging the scent along the ground in careful patterns, leading away from our clearing. Then she hid, and she waited, and when the pack sent scouts to investigate, she watched how fast they came, and which way they approached, and how they spread out to search. She was timing them. She was measuring their response. She was poking the nightmare with a careful stick to see exactly how it would move. She mimicked their calls. This was the most frightening thing I saw her do. She had learned enough of their language in a single day to make the sounds herself, low in her throat, and she used them. She made a call that meant nothing here, and watched a scout turn away. She made a call that meant come, and watched two of them drift toward an empty stretch of trees. She was not just reading their language now, she was speaking it. She was lying to them in their own tongue. By the end of the second day, she knew their patrol times. She knew that the pack moved out from their den in a regular rhythm, that there were windows when the paths near our clearing were empty, that the creatures rested in the deep heat of midday and ranged widest in the dark. She knew their numbers near enough. She knew which calls would draw them and which would turn them away. She had taken a thing that had no pattern to my frightened eyes, and she had found the pattern, and she had begun to learn how to play it like an instrument. That night, the other Tethan argued with her. Lorun, gentle and afraid, begged her to stop. He said she was drawing the creature's attention, that her tests were a danger to all of us, that we should abandon the clearing and hide far away, and simply pray the relief ship found us before the dark did. Pell agreed with him. They were not wrong to be afraid. But Ren listened to all of it with her still face, and when they were done, she said only one thing. If we run, she said, we run on their world, by their rules, in their dark, and they will find us, because they always find the ones who run. We have one advantage. They do not know what I am. They have hunted frightened, scattering things their whole lives, and they think that is the only kind of prey there is. She set down her stone. Talia has perhaps another day, maybe less. I am not going to spend it hiding. No one argued after that. There was something in the way she said it that ended argument. The third day she built. I had thought, watching her watch and watching her test, that her plan would be some clever trick of words and timing, that she would talk her way past the pack with their own calls and simply slip in and out unseen. I was wrong. The calls and the patterns were only part of it. On the third day, she went to the wreck of our shuttle, and she went through it with the same focused calm she brought to everything. And she began to gather things. Chemicals from the engine coolant, lengths of wire and cord, sharp pieces of broken hull, containers, a small welding tool that still held charge. She worked all day, and as she worked, she explained the parts of it to me. Partly, I think, because she had decided to trust me, and partly because I came to understand she needed to speak the plan aloud to check it for flaws. She mixed the coolant with other things in careful amounts, and she made a substance that she said would burn very bright and very fast, and she divided it into small containers with simple timers made from our own wire. She sharpened the pieces of hull into points and bound them to lengths of wood. She took the cord and she made loops and tension traps, the kind a small, soft creature on a dangerous world had learned to make 100,000 years ago, and she set them in her mind against the patrol routes she had mapped. And she made noisemakers, small things, simple things that when triggered would produce the calls she had learned, so that she could send false messages into the dark from a dozen places at once and make the pack believe their world had gone mad. By the time the light began to fade on the third day, she was finished. She stood in the center of our clearing, with the fruits of 3 days laid out around her, and she was no longer the plain, quiet creature I had mistaken her for on the first day. She had wrapped dark cord around her hands. She had bound her tools and her containers to her body, where she could reach them fast. Her face was the calm, awake, focused thing it had become the night Talia was taken, only more so, sharpened to an edge by 3 days of relentless work. She looked at her stones one last time, all of them, the maps and the timings and the language she had stolen, and the long, careful arithmetic of an enemy turned into a known quantity. Then she stood, and she looked toward the dark trees where her friend had been taken, and she breathed out slowly, the other Teth, and watched her with wide, frightened eyes. I watched her too, but I was no longer only afraid. Something else had grown in me over those 3 days, something I had never felt before in my soft and careful life. I think it was hope, but a strange new kind of hope, the kind that has teeth. "My people," I said quietly, "if one of us were taken, we would send 1,000 prayers into the dark, and we would wait for the dark to answer." Ren checked the cord on her hands. She did not look up. "Prayers don't have timets," she said. "Mine does." And I understood finally and completely. Which of the two things the dark should be afraid of? It was not the prayers. It had never been the prayers. The thing the dark should fear was standing in our ruined clearing in the last light of the third day, small and tired and utterly certain, having spent 72 hours turning a world that swallowed gods into a thing she could solve. She had not screamed. She had not run. She had calculated. And now the calculating was done. She looked at me. "You don't have to come," she said. I thought of Talia, who had touched my shoulder when I was afraid, and made me almost laugh on the worst day of my life. I thought of all the generations of my people who had run from the dark and never once walked into it. I felt my legs shake. I stood up anyway. "I am coming," I said. For the first time in 3 days, something that was almost a smile touched the corner of Ren's mouth. "Then stay behind me," she said, "and step where I step. I've already done the math on every other path. Yours is the only variable I haven't solved for. Don't make me solve it the hard way." We went into the trees. We went into the dark. And behind us, the fire burned low. And ahead of us, the things that had taken Talia called to one another in a language they did not know we could speak, still believing in the last hour before everything changed, that they were the most dangerous thing on that world. The trees swallowed us whole, and the last gray light died behind the canopy, and we were inside the math. Ren moved through the dark, like she had walked it 100 times. She had not, of course, but she had spent 3 days learning its rules, and a rule learned is almost as good as a path walked. She kept low, she kept slow. Every few steps she stopped and listened, her head tilted, reading the calls that drifted through the trees, and each time she would adjust our direction by a small amount, the way a creature follows a scent only she could smell. I stayed behind her and stepped where she stepped, exactly as she had told me. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. Every part of my body, every instinct bred into me across the long history of my careful species, screamed at me to turn and flee back to the dying fire and the others. The dark pressed in from all sides. The heavy air made each breath a labor. And the sounds were all around us now, no longer distant cries but near and real. The soft, heavy movement of large bodies in the canopy above, the low calls passing back and forth over our heads. We were inside their world now. We were walking through the middle of the thing that had haunted my nightmares. But Ren was not afraid, and somehow her lack of fear became a rope I could hold. I watched the back of her, the dark cord wrapped around her hands, the steady, patient way she moved, and I borrowed her calm because I had none of my own. There she breathed the first word she had spoken since we left the clearing. She had stopped at the base of a vast tree, and she pointed up, and I followed her hand, and saw a path worn into the great branches above, a road in the canopy, smooth and dark from the passing of many heavy bodies, one of their main routes. They'll pass along it soon. We wait. We pressed ourselves against the trunk, and we waited, and Ren counted under her breath, and I realized she was counting towards something that she knew when the patrol would come, because she had timed them the day before, and she was right. Almost exactly when her counting reached its end, they came. I felt them before I saw them. A heaviness in the branches above, a shifting of the leaves. Then they passed over us, 3 of the great creatures moving along their canopy road, and I pressed myself flat against the trunk and did not breathe. They were so large, so close. I could hear the air moving in and out of them, could hear the small sounds their bodies made. One of them paused almost directly above us, and for one endless moment, I was certain it had sensed us, certain it would look down, and the 3 days of careful work would end in an instant. Ren's hand found my arm in the dark. She did not grip it hard. She just rested her hand there, steady and warm, and the steadiness said, "Be still," the way it cannot. And I was still, and the creature above us moved on, following the others along the road in the trees, and the heaviness passed, and they were gone. I let out my breath very slowly. My legs were shaking so hard I thought I would fall. Ren looked at me in the dark and gave a single small nod, and the nod said, "You did well," and I was absurdly, fiercely grateful for it. "Their timing held," she whispered. "Good. That means the rest of the model holds too." She moved again, and I followed. And now I understood why she had wanted to confirm the patrol. It was not only to avoid them, it was to test her own arithmetic to make sure the 3 days of calculation matched the real world before she staked everything on it. The patrol had come exactly when she predicted. Her math was sound, she could trust it, and so could I. We went deeper. As we moved, Ren showed me the Deathworld through her eyes, and it changed everything I thought I understood. To me, the jungle was a wall of random terror, every shadow a threat, every sound a warning, all of it a chaos, designed to overwhelm a creature like me. But Ren did not see chaos. She saw a system. She would point silently at things as we passed, and I began to see them too, a place where the ground dipped, where water would gather, where the prey the pack hunted would come to drink, and so where the pack would hunt, a change in the kinds of plants that grew, marking the edge of the pack's territory, a tree with deep claw marks at a certain height, a marker the creatures use the way my people use the lights of a port to know they are near home. Everything that had seemed random to me was to her a piece of a pattern. The Deathworld was not chaos. It was only a very large and very dangerous machine. And Ren had spent 3 days learning its gears. She was not braver than me because she felt less fear. I came to understand that she felt fear too, that she had simply learned across the whole history of her relentless species to keep working while afraid. That I think is the real difference between her people and mine. We stop when we are afraid. They keep going. They keep thinking. They turn the fear into fuel, and they keep solving the problem. And that is the most frightening and the most wonderful thing about them. They evolved with things like this, I whispered to her at one point, half to myself, working it out as I spoke. On your world, there were creatures that hunted you. There were, she said softly, eyes moving over the dark for most of our history. Bigger than us, stronger, faster. We had nothing but each other and our minds. She stepped over a route I would not have seen. So we got very good at 2 things. Working together and outthinking the things that wanted to take us. Every soft, slow creature that survived a world like that survived because it learned the pattern of the predator and turned the pattern around. We just never stopped. She glanced back at me. Your people ran and lived. Mine stayed and learned. Different answers to the same question. Neither one is wrong, but mine is the one you want in the dark right now. I could not argue with that. I did not want to argue with that. I only wanted to keep stepping where she stepped, deeper into the thing my people had run from for 10,000 years. It was near the deepest part of the night that we found the den. Ren had been leading us along the edge of a long, low ridge, and she stopped at a place where the ground fell away into a wide hollow, and she lowered herself flat onto her belly and gestured for me to do the same. I crept up beside her and looked down into the hollow, and what I saw stole the breath from my body. It was not a simple animal lair. I had imagined, if I had imagined anything, a hole in the ground, a tangle of branches, the rough shelter of a beast. This was nothing like that. The hollow had been shaped, earth had been moved, branches woven, paths worn into clear and ordered routes. There were openings in the high banks that I understood were dens, many of them arranged with a kind of logic. There were creatures posted at the edges, still and watchful, and I understood with a cold shock that they were sentries, that the pack set guards the way a port sets watch, and in the center of it all, dug deep and dark, was a single great chamber. And I knew without being told that this was the place Wren had found the marks of on the first day, the place where the pack carried the things they took. "It's bigger than I modeled," Wren breathed, and for the first time I heard something in her voice that was not certainty. More of them, more structure. They're not just a pack. There she searched for the word, organized, like a settlement. There's a hierarchy, centuries, ranges, a center. She was quiet for a moment, and I could feel her mind racing in the dark beside me, taking in this new and larger truth, folding it into her arithmetic. It changes the timing, not the plan. The timing. I looked at the scale of what lay below us, the dozens of dark shapes, the centuries, the great central chamber, and I felt the old fear rise in me like a tide. "Wren," I whispered, "there are too many. We are two. You are one small creature, and I am a coward. We cannot. We're not going to fight them," she said, still watching, still calculating. "If this were a fight, we'd already have lost. We are never going to fight them. We are going to make them fight the only thing more frightening to a pack than an enemy." She finally looked at me, and in the faint light her eyes were bright and certain again. The brief crack of doubt sealed over. "Confusion," she said. "Panic. A pack like this works because every member trusts the calls, trusts the patterns, trusts that the creature beside it knows the same things it knows. I have spent 3 days learning to lie to them in their own language. Tonight I am going to make them believe their whole world has turned against them, and while they are busy being afraid of each other, we are going to walk into the center and take back what is ours." I stared at her. The size of it, the daring of it, the cold brilliance of it was almost too much to hold. She was not going to overpower an apex predator. She was going to use the very thing that made the pack strong, their trust in one another, and turn it into the thing that broke them. "And Talia?" I asked. "Is she? Can you see her?" Wren's eyes moved to the great central chamber, and they stayed there a long moment, and her jaw tightened in the way I had learned to read. "That's where she is," she said quietly. "I'd stake everything on it. That's where they keep what they take." She began very slowly to unwrap the tools bound to her body, checking each one in the dark. "Here's how it works. I'm going to place the noisemakers in a ring around the den on timers, each one set to a different call, calls that contradict each other. Danger from the north, food from the south, the come now call from the east, all at once, all from places where there's nothing. To them it will sound like the world has gone insane. The sentries will break to investigate. The center will empty as they go to find threats that aren't there." She held up one of the small, bright burning containers she had made, and these go at the edges set to light up just after real danger in the false directions to make the lie true enough to hold. When the panic peaks, there will be a gap, a window where the path to the center is open. It will not be a long window. It will be the only one we get. "How long?" I breathed. "Based on their response times from yesterday's tests." She thought for a moment. 90 seconds. Maybe less if the alpha is sharp. A shadow crossed her face when she said the word alpha, and I did not understand it then, but I would. "We will have 90 seconds to cross the open ground, reach the center chamber, get Talia, and be gone before they realize the threats were never real and come back. If we are slow, the window closes, and we are two small, soft things in the middle of their home with no fire and no escape." She looked at me steadily. "Do you understand what I'm asking you to do?" I looked down into that ordered, terrible place, full of more apex creatures than I could count, and I thought about crossing the open ground in the center of it, with 90 seconds on a clock made of borrowed time. Every part of my history said to run. I thought of Talia in the dark of that central chamber, alive, waiting, with her own clock running down. "I understand," I said, and to my own amazement, my voice did not shake. Wren began to move, placing her noisemakers in a wide ring around the den, slipping from shadow to shadow, and I helped her, carrying the small, bright containers and setting them where she pointed. And the whole time the sentries watched the dark, and did not know that the dark had learned to think. We worked for what felt like hours, and was probably less than one. We worked in total silence, two small creatures laying a trap around a nightmare, and the only sound was the breathing of the great pack below and the distant calls drifting through the trees. When the last noisemaker was set and the last container placed, Ren brought us back to the lip of the ridge above the central chamber, the closest point to the place where Talia was held. She crouched there in the dark, and she took one long look at everything. The ring of traps, the open ground, the path to the center, the centuries, the great dark chamber. She was checking it all one final time against the arithmetic in her head. I watched her do it, and I understood that this was the moment all 3 days had been building toward. The watching, the testing, the building, all of it had been to bring us to this single point, this 1/92nd window she was about to tear open in the heart of a death world. She reached into the pouch at her side, and her hand closed around the trigger that would start it all. The small device that would set the first noisemaker calling into the dark and begin the cascade. When it starts, she whispered, "It goes fast. Stay with me. Step where I step. Do not stop no matter what you see or hear until we have her. Can you do that?" "Yes," I said. She looked at me one last time, and there was something almost gentle in her exhausted face. Something that reminded me for just a moment of the way Talia had touched my shoulder on the worst day of my life. "Good," Ren said. "Then let's go get our friend back." Her thumb pressed down on the trigger. And out in the dark, on every side of the den, the first false call rang out into the night, and the most patient creature I have ever known went to war with nothing but 3 days of arithmetic and the refusal to ever stop thinking. The night came apart exactly the way she had built it, too. The first false call rang out from the north, a sharp cry of danger in the pack's own tongue, and I felt the whole den below us go rigid in an instant. Heads came up, bodies turned. Centuries that had been still as stone snapped toward the sound. Then the second call came from the south, the come now call, urgent and demanding, contradicting the first. Then the third from the east, and the fourth from the west, all of them genuine in their grammar, all of them impossible together, a storm of meaning crashing in from every direction at once. I watched the pack's perfect order begin to break. The creatures looked from one direction to another, and I could feel their confusion even from the ridge. The way a settled crowd becomes a frightened one. The calls kept coming, layered now, Ren's timers firing in the patterns she had designed, and the sentries broke from their posts and rushed toward the false threats, exactly as she had said they would. The center of the den began to empty. Then the bright containers lit. They flared at the edges of the den in the false directions, brilliant and sudden, real fire blooming where the false calls had promised danger, and the lie became true enough to believe. The pack's confusion turned to something sharper. Now there was light and heat in the dark, real things to fear, and the creatures surged toward them, drawn by the certainty that their world was truly under threat. The great central chamber, the place where Talia was held, emptied of its guards as the pack rushed outward to meet enemies that did not exist. Now Ren breathed, and she was over the lip of the ridge and moving before I had fully understood the word. I went after her. I do not know where I found the courage. I think I borrowed the last of it from her. We came down the bank into the heart of the den, into the open ground that had been thick with apex creatures a minute before, and was now in the window she had torn open, nearly empty. We ran low and fast across it, and the bright lights flared at the edges of my vision, and the false calls screamed in the dark, and the great pack churned at the borders of its own home, chasing ghosts, and we ran straight through the gap in the middle of it all. The clock was running, 90 seconds. I could almost feel it ticking down. We reached the mouth of the central chamber, and Ren went in without slowing, and I followed her into the dark. It was close and warm inside, and it took my eyes a terrible moment to adjust. And then I saw her Talia. She was at the back of the chamber, and she was alive. She was weak and still, and her eyes were half closed. But when the light from the burning containers flickered across her face, those eyes opened, and they found Ren, and something broke across them that I will never forget. It was not surprise. That is the thing I remember most. Talia was not surprised to see her friend walk into the center of a Deathworld den to bring her home. She had known, even in the dark, even taken, even with her own clock running down, she had known Ren would come. "You're late," Talia breathed, and her cracked voice was trying to make a joke. "Even then traffic," Ren said, and her hands were already moving, freeing Talia from the place she was held, checking her quickly with the same focused calm she brought to everything. "Can you stand? You have to stand. We have about 50 seconds and then this whole plan becomes a very different plan." "I can stand," Talia said, though I could see it cost her everything. Ren got an arm under her, and I got under the other side, and together we lifted her, and we turned toward the mouth of the chamber, and the open ground beyond, and the window that was closing with every breath, and the Alpha was standing in the chamber mouth, blocking the way out. I knew it at once for what it was, though Ren had only named it before. It was larger than the others, older, its hide marked with the scars of a long life of being the most dangerous thing in a world of dangerous things. And it was not confused. The false calls still screamed in the dark, and the bright light still burned at the edges of the den, and the rest of the pack still churned in panic at the borders. But the Alpha stood there in the chamber mouth, perfectly still, and it was looking directly at Ren, and there was nothing confused in its eyes at all. This was the variable she could not solve. I understood it in that moment with a sick certainty. She had modeled the pack, she had timed the patrols and learned the calls, and turned their trust against them. But the Alpha was old, and it was clever, and it had not run to chase the ghosts, because somewhere in its scarred and ancient mind, it had understood that the ghosts were not the real threat. It had felt the pattern of the lie, the way Ren felt the pattern of everything, and it had not been fooled. It had come to the one place that mattered. It had come to the center, and now it stood between us and the open night, and it was watching the small creature who had dared to outthink it, and it was not afraid. For one terrible breath, everything stopped. The two of them looked at each other across the dark chamber, the old apex predator and the small soft creature with the cord wrapped around her hands, and I felt the whole careful structure of 3 days of arithmetic hang in the balance. Talia sagged between us. The clock ran down, the window closed, and the one variable Ren had not been able to solve looked at her with patient, intelligent eyes, and it took a slow step into the chamber, cutting off the only way out. I felt Ren go very still beside me, and for the first time in 3 days, I did not know what she would do. The thing about humans, the thing the Academy files got wrong, the thing I learned in that chamber in the heart of the Deathworld is this. A creature like me faced with a problem it has not solved freezes. The unsolved thing fills our whole mind, and we lock up and we wait to be taken. That is what my species does. That is what I would have done. I felt myself doing it even then, felt my body going rigid with the old useless fear. But Ren did not freeze when her plan met the one thing it could not account for. She did not lock up, and she did not despair. 3 days of arithmetic had given her something I did not have the words for then and barely have them now. It had not just given her a plan, it had given her fluency. She knew the den, the pack, the calls, the terrain, the fire, all of it, so completely and so deeply that when the plan broke, she did not need the plan anymore. She had become the kind of creature that could solve the problem in real time, faster than the old predator could press its advantage, improvising at a speed I could not follow. She moved before the Alpha did. She did not move toward it. She did not move away from it. She did something I never would have imagined. She let go of Talia, trusting me to hold her, and she snatched one of the small bright containers from her belt. The last one, the one she had held back, and in the same motion, she made a sound, a call, one of the calls she had stolen, but not one of the danger calls or the come now calls. This was a different one, a deeper one. And I understood later what it was. It was a challenge, the sound one Alpha makes to another, the sound that says, "This is mine, and you are nothing." She threw it in the Alpha's own language, in its own home, in front of what remained of its pack, and the old creature's head snapped back, as if struck. Its whole body changed. The patient-watching predator became something furious and reactive, every instinct screaming at the impossible insult. And in the half-breath that its ancient pride overrode its ancient cunning, it lunged at the source of the challenge. And the source of the challenge was no longer there. Ren had already moved low and fast, sliding past the great body as it committed to its lunge, and she struck the bright container against the chamber wall as she passed, and it flared to brilliant burning light directly in the Alpha's eyes. The creature reared back, blind and roaring. Its careful intelligence drowned in sudden light and pain and rage, and in the chaos of it, in the window she had torn open with nothing but a stolen word and a flare of light, and the refusal to freeze, Ren was back at Talia's side under her arm, hauling us all toward the chamber mouth the Alpha had abandoned. "Move," she said, and we moved. We came out of the chamber into the churning dark of the den, and the pack was still scattered and confused, still chasing the ghost she had made, and we ran through the gap between them with Talia stumbling between us. The Alpha's roar echoed behind us, but it was blind and enraged, and it could not lead a pack that was already in chaos. And that was the whole of it. That was the thing Ren had understood that I had not. She did not need to overpower the Alpha. She only needed it to stop being the cold, clever thing that had not been fooled, and to become, for 10 seconds, an ordinary, furious animal like all the rest. She had reached into its mind and turned its own strength, its pride, its certainty, into the lever that broke it. We crossed the open ground. We reached the bank. We climbed it with Talia between us, and the Deathworld den fell away behind us, full of panic and false fire, and one blind, raging Alpha that had met a small, soft creature who planned and had lost. We did not stop running until the calls had faded behind us, and the first gray light was touching the canopy above. And when we finally stopped, when we finally lowered Talia gently to the ground in a hollow far from the den, Ren stood over her, swaying with exhaustion, her face streaked with dirt and ash, the cord still wrapped around her shaking hands. She did not look like a triumphant hunter. I had expected, I think, that she would look fierce in her victory, proud, like the warriors in the old stories my people tell. She did not. She looked emptied. She looked like a problem that had finally, after 3 days, been completed and had nothing left over once the completing was done. She looked down at Talia, alive and breathing in the gray light, and the calm that had held her for 3 days began very slowly to crack. "We did it," I breathed. I could hardly believe the words. "Ren, we did it. She is alive. We did it." Ren did not answer right away. She lowered herself to the ground beside Talia, and she took her friend's hand and she held it, and for a long moment she just looked at her, at the proof that the arithmetic had been right, that the variable had been solved, that the clock had been beaten, and then the small fierce creature, who had not spoken for 3 days, who had turned a world that swallowed gods into a thing she could solve, finally let go of the thing she had been holding back since the night Talia was taken. She did not make a sound, but in the gray light I saw the tears come, and I understood at last everything I had gotten wrong about her, and about her whole strange and terrible and wonderful species. The grief came all at once in the gray light of the morning, now that there was finally nothing left to solve. For 3 days I had watched Ren be calm, and I had called it coldness, because I did not have a better word, and because my own frightened heart could not imagine a creature that felt deeply and worked anyway. I had thought the silence meant she felt nothing. I had thought the arithmetic was the absence of love. I understood now, watching her shoulders shake as she held Talia's hand in the dawn, that I had it exactly backwards. The calm had not been the absence of feeling. The calm had been feeling held down with both hands, pressed flat and turned into fuel. Because a small, soft creature on a dangerous world cannot afford to fall apart while the work is still undone. The grief had been there the whole time. She had simply refused to let it out until it could no longer cost her friend's life. That, I think, is the most human thing I have ever witnessed. Not the cleverness, not the courage, the discipline to carry unbearable feelings silently for 3 days, because letting it out 1 hour too early would have meant losing everything. Talia's eyes opened. She was weak, but she was there, truly there, and she looked up at her friend, weeping silently above her, and she did something that I did not expect. She smiled, And then she reached up with her free hand, slow and trembling, and she touched Ren's face, and she said in a voice barely above a breath, "I told them while they had me. I told them you were coming. I don't think they believed me." Her cracked smile widened a little. "Should have believed me." And Ren laughed. It came out broken and wet and tangled up with the tears, but it was a laugh, the first sound of pure feeling I had heard from her in 3 days. And the two of them held on to each other in the gray light, and I stood a little apart and watched them, and something in my own careful heart broke open and let in a kind of light I had never known before. They did not speak much, those two. In the moments after, they did not need to. I came to understand, watching them, that this was a friendship older and deeper than I had guessed. The kind that does not need words, because everything has already been said 1,000 times. Talia had known Ren would come, not because of any promise, but because she knew the shape of her friend's soul. And Ren had come not out of duty, but because to her, a world without Talia in it was simply not a world she was willing to accept. And so she had set about with everything she had, making sure it would not be that kind of world. That is what the 3 days had been. Not coldness, love expressed in the only language fierce enough to beat a death world. Arithmetic, patience, and the refusal to stop. We rested in the hollow until the light was full. Talia could not walk far on her own, so Ren and I carried her between us, and we made our way back through the trees toward the clearing and the wreck of our shuttle. The way back was easier than the way in, partly because Ren knew the paths now, and partly because the pack, scattered and shaken and leaderless in its confusion, did not trouble us. We had not destroyed them. Ren was always careful to say that in the days after. We had not won by destroying them. We had won by frightening them, by turning their own strength against them for one night, and by being long gone before they gathered themselves again. It was, she said, the only kind of victory a small, soft creature could ever really hope for against an apex thing. You did not beat it by becoming stronger than it. You beat it by being smarter and faster to adapt, and willing to walk into its home and take back what it stole while it was still trying to understand what had happened. When we came back into the clearing, the other Tethan rose up in astonishment. They had given us up. Lorun and Pell and the others had spent the 3 days mourning Talia, and the 3 hours since we left, mourning us, certain that we had walked into the dark to be taken in our turn. And then we came out of the trees, all 3 of us alive, with Talia breathing between us, and the look on their faces was a thing I will carry with me always. They had believed, as my whole species has always believed, that the dark always wins. And here was the proof, walking out of the trees in the morning light, that sometimes if you are clever enough and patient enough and refuse to stop it, does not we had 2 days still before the relief ship would even begin to look for us. They were hard days. Talia needed rest and care, and the death world did not become gentle just because we had survived 1 night of it. But something had changed in our little crew. The paralyzing fear that had gripped us since the crash was gone, or at least it was no longer in charge. We had watched a small, soft creature do the impossible, and it had taught us something about ourselves. Even the most careful species, I learned, can find courage when it is needed, if it has something fierce enough to borrow it from. Ren spent those 2 days doing what she always did. She worked. She studied the wreck of our shuttle, with the same focused calm she had brought to the pack, and she found in the cracked engine core a thing that could be made to work for a short time if it were coaxed carefully. Not enough to fly us off the world, but enough to send a signal far stronger than our automatic beacon. A signal that would reach the relief ship not in 4 days, but in 1. She built it from the wreckage and her own relentless cleverness, and she sent it, and the relief ship turned toward us early, and the 9-day clock of the death world never reached its end. While we waited, I sat with her one evening by the fire, and I asked her the question that had been growing in me since the night Talia was taken. "Were you angry?" I asked when they took her. "In all of it, the 3 days, the den, the Alpha, were you angry?" Ren was quiet for a while, looking into the flames. "No," she said at last. "Anger is fast. Anger makes you charge into the dark before you've done the math. If I'd been angry, I'd have followed them that first night, and I'd have been taken too, and Talia would have run out of time alone. She turned the words over carefully, the way she turned everything over. I was afraid the whole time, afraid she'd run out of time before I solved it, afraid I'd get the math wrong, afraid of the alpha. When I saw it in the chamber and knew I hadn't accounted for it, she looked at me, but I wasn't angry. Anger would have made me stupid, and I couldn't afford to be stupid, so I put it away. I'll feel it later, maybe when there's room, or maybe it'll just turn into something else. It usually does. I thought about that for a long time after. I think about it still because I had watched her do all of that. The watching and the testing and the building and the walking into the dark, the turning of a world that swallows gods into a thing she could solve. I had watched her outthink an apex predator in its own home and take back what it had stolen, and she had done all of it without anger. She had done it cold and careful and afraid and in control of herself every moment. And the thought that came to me then, the thought that has never quite left me since, was this: if a human could do all that without anger, only with love and fear and arithmetic, then what does an angry one do? What is a human capable of when the careful discipline comes off? I hope I never find out. I hope the rest of the galaxy never finds out either. The relief ship came on the second evening, dropping through the triple canopy on its bright engines, and the Deathworld that had nearly ended us let us go. The way a current finally releases a swimmer who refused to drown. We carried Talia aboard. She was recovering by then, her warmth and her humor coming back to her a little more each hour. And the first thing she did when she was settled safely on the ship was reach out and take Ren's hand again. And the two of them sat together in the bright, clean light of the cabin, alive together on their way home. Later, when I made my report, I sat for a long time over the part that asked me to describe the events on the surface. The official files of my people call humans the Deathworld species. They warn ships to handle them with care, to avoid stressing them, to keep a distance from a human under great pressure because of the destructive things a human might do. I read those warnings again after, and I understood that they had captured the smallest, most surface part of the truth and missed the whole vast depth beneath it. The danger of a human is not that they break under pressure. I have seen the opposite. The danger of a human is what they become when they refuse to break. When the worst thing happens, when the dark takes what they love, a human does not shatter, and a human does not charge blindly into the night. A human goes quiet. A human sits down by the fire and begins to think, and then slowly and patiently, and with a discipline that should frighten every careful species in the galaxy, a human turns the unbearable thing into a problem and solves it, and walks into the dark, and takes back what was stolen. I did not write the 3 days into my report. I described the crash and the loss and the rescue and the relief ship, and I left out the long, quiet arithmetic at the center of it all. I told myself it was because no one would believe it. But the real reason, I think, was that some things the galaxy is not ready to know. Some things are better left as rumors and warnings in the Academy files, half-believed, easy to dismiss. Because if the rest of the galaxy truly understood what I had seen in that clearing, what a small, soft creature could do with 3 days and a refusal to stop, I do not think it would sleep easily ever again. She did not speak. That is what I remember most. When the dark took her friend, she did not scream, and she did not weep, and she did not pray. She calculated for 3 days, she calculated while the death world breathed around her, and the clock ran down, and at the end of those 3 days, she turned a world that eats gods into a thing that returned what it stole. I served the rest of my voyage with the two of them, Ren and Talia, and I came to count them as the closest companions I have ever known. And on the nights when the dark presses in, and the old fear of my species rises up in me, I think of a small creature sitting by a dying fire, making careful marks on a flat stone, refusing to break, refusing to stop. And I find that I am not afraid anymore, because I have seen what the dark fears. I have seen it sit down by the fire and pick up a piece of charred wood and begin very quietly to do the math. And I would rather be on its